As I stared into the darkness, I quickly realized that I was lost. The rest stop was nowhere to be seen, and that's when I started walking forward until I could no longer hear the screams and cries of the woman. I decided to head the direction of west and pray that I would find my way back. As I walked in the darkness, the only sounds I could hear were the sounds of wind and the occasional sounds of what I would hoped would be coyotes. I took a pause every little bit and I gave a look around to make sure no one was following me. I cursed myself for not paying attention in Boy Scouts, and I was quite the idiot running in the desert aimlessly, even if it was to help someone. I got the sinking feeling that I could very well die and no one would ever find me. All I could do now was try to find the rest stop and then go from there. 10:58 p.m. As I continued to wander with no direction in the darkness of the desert, I saw something in the distance. It was at least 50 to 60 yards away from me. It was hard to make out, but it looked like the height of another person. I stopped to see if I could get a better look, and that's when I noticed the faintest of light coming from that direction. I stood still, and I kept my eyes on the light. It was another person in the distance.
"Hello! Can you help me?"
I yelled. The person in light stood still and let out no response.
"Hey, there's this woman out here that needs help."
I screamed. Still no response and no movement from the figure in the distance. Maybe they couldn't understand me, so I started moving toward the direction of the light. I kept my eyes fixated on the source and started to jog in the direction. I thought to myself, if I can get to this person, I could convince them to lead me back to the rest stop and hopefully go with me to find the woman. Anything was better than wandering aimlessly in the desert at this point. As I got halfway to the figure in the darkness, the light disappeared. I immediately stopped and tried to look forward, but the figure was no longer there. It was just the darkness and me again, all alone. The only sound was blowing of the wind, the sound of coyotes, and the sound of my own breath. Nothing but the silence of the desert. Suddenly, I saw the light again in the corner of my eye. It was now in the opposite direction, and it was another 50 yards away. I turned my head to see the figure standing there, pointing the light directly at me. I really didn't care who it was. I just ran towards the direction that it was coming from. I just moved as quickly as I could. I felt my heart beat rapidly and felt the small rolls of sweat coming down my face as I tried to get to the source of the light as quickly as possible. As I almost reached the source, the light dimmed again and I lost my footing. I fell hard on the ground below me with my face buried in the dirt. I laid there for a few minutes trying to catch my breath. I lifted my head up to notice a dimly lit light approaching me. I covered my eyes as it got closer, as I struggled to try to make out the figure in front of me.
Oh, damn batteries.
I looked up to see a man in his late 30s to early 40s, just standing there silently. He was shaking and tapping his flashlight. He was a shorter man with tan skin, in dust-covered jeans and a red t-shirt. He shined the light in my face again as I mustered up the strength to stand up.
What in the damn hell are you doing out here?
I paused for a second and looked at him. The light coming from his flashlight kept dimming and going out. He looked down and gave it a couple of taps, and the light started to flicker in and out. We both stood there, keeping our eyes locked on each other. I was very wary of him, just because of the events of the night, and I'm sure he was weary of me being a random person in the desert.
Someone's in trouble. I need to get back to the rest stop, I managed to say. Do you have a phone I could use?
We don't get service out in these parts. Closest one is the damn broken one at the rest stop, he replied.
We started to move forward. The man stopped periodically to shake the flashlight anytime the light would go out. As we kept walking, I noticed I could see a faint light in the distance. It was the lights of the rest stop. I rejoiced and turned back to the man.
Oh my god, thank you, sir. Will you go with me to find the woman?
He nodded in agreement. We kept walking as the lights to the rest stop got closer with every step. The light from the flashlight dimmed slowly. I heard the man stop and start shaking the flashlight again. I just kept looking forward at the rest stop, where I could see my rental car in the distance. I rejoiced as I made it back and thought to myself that both me and the man could go back to find the screaming woman.
Oh, damn batteries.
After getting sick and tired of the dying flashlight, I pulled out my cell phone again, turning on the flashlight app and turned around. When I did to show the man that we had light, there was nothing. The man had completely disappeared. I scanned the area and looked around, but he was nowhere to be found.
Hello?
I called out. There was nothing. I called out a few more times, but I quickly realized that I was alone again. I was starting to wonder if I was losing my mind. There was absolutely no way a man that I just walked through the desert could have vanished into thin air. I thought maybe none of the events of the night had actually happened. It could just be chalked up to stress and exhaustion, or I was just going absolutely crazy. Everything that happened tonight was too unreal to be an actual reality. As I tried to sort through my thoughts, I decided it would be best if I just hunkered down in my rental car. I would ride this out and wait for daylight. Surely, by then someone would stop, whether it was another traveler or a state employee to check up on the rest stop. I looked around the area to see if anything was out of place, and I saw my car in the same parking space, but something was out of place. As I made my way, I saw a piece of paper folded in half laying underneath one of my windshield wipers. As I walked closer, it looked like a crude drawing. I stopped one more time to see if I could see anyone, but it was still just me. I walked to the piece of paper to notice the crude drawing was a rough-looking smiley face. I then unfolded the piece of paper to see that it had one word on it. Trunk. The fear hit me again, and this was not from exhaustion. It was not from stress, and I was not going crazy. Something else was going on at this rest stop, and whatever it was telling me to open the trunk of my rental car. I walked around to the trunk slowly and opened up my cell phone flashlight. I paused outside of the trunk for a second, bracing myself for whatever was waiting for me. I found my keys and opened the trunk slowly to see my luggage, snacks, and other things in the front. I shuffled the contents around and noticed a small black garbage bag in the very back. It was crinkled up and moist, and something was in it. While in a panic, I grabbed the bag and pulled it towards me. I stared at it for a few moments, trying to recollect if maybe I had put the bag in there, but it made no sense. I shined the cell phone light on the bag and started to open it. Then, to my horror, I quickly realized what it was. Sitting in this crinkled black garbage bag was the clothes of the woman screaming in the desert. They were soaked in blood, strands of her hair all over them, and at the bottom of the bag was a small box cutter. Not only was someone else with me at the rest stop, but that someone was now leaving evidence of murder in the trunk of my rental car. I shoveled all the contents back into the bag and quickly closed the trunk. I stared past the rest stop into the darkness of the desert. My mind started to go 1,000 miles a minute. I was going to die at this rest stop. Even more troubling is if I survived, I was going to be found with a bag of blood-stained female clothing. This dimly lit rest stop in the middle of nowhere was nothing more than a gateway to hell.
What do you want?
I muttered. I ran to the driver's side of my car and opened it. I jumped in and looked everywhere for anything else that might be lying around. I scanned the back seat, but it was untouched and empty. I checked the glove box and middle console, but it was the same as before, with just papers from my rental company. I pulled out my keys and tried to start the rental car, but it refused to turn over. I tried several times, but each time it would just stall out, so I sat in the rental car at this rest stop in the desert and realized I was defeated. I was not going anywhere. 12:38 p.m. I sat in my car covered in darkness silently, wondering what would come next. I could feel my entire body tense up every time the wind blew. My heart would jump every time I would see a bush or the shadow of something in the distance. I had to use the bathroom again, but I was too fearful to leave the car, even if it hurt my bladder. I cursed myself for taking this desolate patch of road, and I swore to myself, if I somehow made it out of this mess, I would never take the I-44 again. As all of these thoughts raced through my mind, I saw a light coming down the road. It looked like a road flare, but it was moving closer and closer. Someone was walking on the side of I-44, and they were coming to my direction. It wasn't my imagination. The person was getting closer. I quickly pulled out my pocket knife and turned on the flashlight app on my phone. I stepped out of my car and looked as the figure approached me.
Thank God, I found somebody,
the figure said.
My truck broke down about 5 miles back. I feel like I've been walking forever.
As the figure approached me, I could see that he was a heavier set man in his late 40s. He was bald and dressed in dark carpenter pants and a denim jacket. He picked up his pace when he saw me and started walking directly towards me. I clenched my pocket knife and locked my eyes on him as he got closer.
I haven't seen anybody or any car since my car broke down. Can you give me a ride to the next town?
He shouted. He finally made it close to me and knelt over to catch his breath. He dropped the flare on the ground and it illuminated the area around us. I kept my eyes on him as he huffed and puffed, and after a few moments, he finally lifted his head up. His eyes were a dark brown color with heavy bags, and his skin was tanned and worn.
My car stalled out too. Do you have a cell phone?
I asked.
Sorry, my cell phone died before my car broke down,
he replied. He stood up straight and shuffled through his pockets for a moment. He pulled out an older clam-shaped flip phone. He flipped it open and tried to power it up, but it was clearly dead. The fact that it ever worked at all was very surprising.
You got any food or water with you? I worked up quite the appetite lugging my fat ass down the road,
he said with a smirk.
Yeah, I got some water and some chips.
I walked over to my car and took a look to see if anything was in the front seat. Nothing but empty bags and bottles. I quickly looped around to pop open my trunk. The man started moving closer towards me, and I started to panic.
What all do you got in there?
he asked. I shuffled through to hide the bag with the woman's clothes and tried to find the water and chips as he inched closer and closer to me. I grabbed a couple of bags of chips and water, then quickly slammed the trunk closed. I quickly handed him a bottle of water and a small bag of chips to help curb his curiosity.
Lord have mercy, we're saved,
he shouted. He opened the bag of chips and started shoveling them into his mouth. He looked around the area and noticed the picnic area. He started to walk towards the table and turned around, motioning for me to follow him. He settled in at the table, continuing to eat his chips and gulp his water. I looked around the rest stop one more time and made my way to him. At this point, it was better to be with someone than be alone. As I sat down slowly across from him at the table, I started to feel a little more at ease. He just gave me a smile as he continued to put chips in his mouth. I opened my bottle of water, taking a few sips before I opened my bag of chips. We both sat there in the darkness, both stranded at the rest stop in the middle of the night.
So, what brings you around these parts? Oh, I'm just trying to make it back home before my car stalled out on me. I live a couple of exits down. I decided to go visit a couple of friends. Next thing you know, my car dies on me,
he said, letting out another hearty laugh.
Sounds like you're having the same amount of luck as me. Well, thank you so much for the food and water. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Lawrence Steedman.
At that moment, he lifted his leg up to cross it, and that's when I noticed it. The boots from before. The dust-covered boots that were standing outside my stall when I first arrived at the rest stop. I felt my bladder release as urine soaked my pants. I felt my body tremble as I looked up to see the man now giving me a sinister smile.
But everyone calls me Larry.
I dropped my water and my chips. I quickly lifted myself up from the picnic area and just ran. I left the rest stop and ran down the shoulder of the road. I ran for what seemed like forever in the dark until a highway patrolman stopped and picked me up. He assumed I was some kind of tweaker because of the smell of urine and the fact that I looked out of my mind. After a long string of questions, he drove me back to the rest stop. He asked me to search my car to make sure I wasn't drinking or I didn't have any kind of drugs. He searched my car from top to bottom, then popped open my trunk. I knew I was done for. I sat there with my legs trembling and weak as he searched in the trunk. After a few minutes, he closed the trunk and said everything checked out. He asked me to follow him to the station just to answer a few more questions. As he pulled out of the rest stop, I checked the trunk one more time. The bag with the woman's clothing was nowhere to be found. I hopped into the rental car and put in the keys. To my surprise, this time, the car started right up. After checking into the station and being asked why I ran down the freeway in the middle of the night, I did the only thing I could do. I lied about everything. I said I got scared when I thought I saw something moving in the darkness. I mean, after all, who was going to believe me about everything that happened? And I did not want to mention the woman or her clothes that were planted in the trunk. The patrolman seemed satisfied with my answers and started to lead me out of the station. As we walked out of the building, I saw the missing persons board. On the board, I saw both the man with the broken flashlight and the screaming woman's pictures. It said that they had been missing since September 2005. Do you know anyone by the name Lawrence Steedman? I asked the patrolman. He looked confused for a second.
Look, I don't like to speak ill of the dead, but that man was a god-awful son of a bitch.